What is up, everybody? Tasteless here. I thought we would review this video that I found on YouTube. My algorithm recommended this to me a couple days ago. It's called The Death of RTS Games, What Killed the Genre. I thought this was a video that would be fun to watch with you guys, as we are about to have a whole bunch of new RTSs come out. We've got Zero Space, we've got Stormgate. So it's kind of a hopeful time, but it's also undeniable that this has been the narrative for years and years, that nobody makes RTS games anymore. It's a dead genre. It's the genre that your dad plays. So I thought we'd watch this video and add my own commentary here.
RTS Genre Dead. It's one of those questions where if you ask 100 different PC gamers, you're probably going to get 100 different answers, but I still think it's an interesting topic to think about, and that is exactly what we're going to do in this video. I think I have a few very good reasons, even if they aren't the only reasons that the genre found itself on.
Command & Conquer there in the background, old CNC.
Before we get into that, I just wanted to thank the Patreon supporters. I wanted to call Matthias from Sweden, who backs this channel at the highest level, and also Zach Garcia, who suggested this topic. If you want to join them, I will leave a link to the Patreon in the description. But with that, well, let's get into it.
Acknowledge.
Reason one, too many games.
Westwood's Command & Conquer is the game that blew the real-time strategy genre wide open. It sold about 1 million copies in its first year, and its follow-up, Command & Conquer Red Alert, sold even better. Figures like that counted as a breakout hit in the mid-1990s, and everyone certainly sat up and took notice. Later titles like Ensemble's Age of Empires 2 and of course Blizzard's StarCraft only further proved that there was gold to be found in them real-time strategy hills. Of course, this led to a flood of copycats. Now, I'm sorry if some of these games are a personal favorite, but a few games that come to mind are Lords of EverQuest, the Star Trek Armada games, and there was even a trilogy of games based on the Left Behind novels. Yes, seriously, look it up.
I have never heard of those three RTSs, by the way. That's crazy. I would think I know every RTS out there. I know all three of those. That's insane.
They exist. Now, games like this, they just mostly came across as a cash grab. And beyond that, there was just too much. Games like the Lord of the Rings, the Battle for Middle-earth series, Star Wars, Empire at Wars, and Stronghold were pretty decent games, but there was just so much out there. With several dozen titles at least hitting the market every year, I think gamers were just overwhelmed. Now, a few dozen titles, that doesn't sound like very much today, does it? I mean, after all, Steam has tens of thousands of games going up on it every year. But remember, this is well before digital was on the rise.
That is a good point. I mean, back then, it was like you'd go to Best Buy or, I don't know, what were the names of the stores that were back then? I mean, Best Buy is one that comes to mind that's still around. Maybe Fry's, or did Fry's sell games? Or you go to like a GameStop, EB Games, yeah, Electronic Boutique, that's another one. But there were not that many PC games. If my memory serves me correctly, I felt like there was, if you went to go look at different games you could buy, there were way more on like a Sega Genesis, or a Super Nintendo, or the original NES. And when you go look at PC games, I felt like there were, maybe dozens in a given store. So, and really there were not that many genres. There were like two genres mainly. It was RTS and point-and-click adventure, and then there was the emergence of shooting games. But even back then, Doom and Duke Nukem, that was like a huge deal. That was like, I can't believe they figured out how to make a game like this. But it was like a lot of King's Quest, Monkey's Island, Command & Conquer, Warcraft 2. I also think he's correct that a lot of these other RTS games that were made were kind of a cash grab, excuse me. In other words, they weren't very well-designed games.
This was mostly retail. Gamers were still going into stores and they were looking for games on shelves. I remember puzzling over what to buy while staring at the shelves at Best Buy and Fry's myself.
I miss doing that, by the way. It is nice. I mean, obviously, it's great that you can download games online, but there was something special about going to a place and like picking up the game or looking at the backs of the covers. I do feel like we're missing something with that now that everything's digital. That being said, all those old games that I really liked, I guess I can get them on the good old games or whatever that's called. But like, I don't know where they are now. So I guess without the emergence of kind of digital shopping, all this stuff would be lost forever.
There's just so many games staring back at you, and it was very hard to make a decision. And this is not just my opinion. Last year, for an article I wrote for Wired about Age of Empires 4, I spoke with Quinn Duffy, who is the game director, or was the game director on that title. While I was talking to him, I wanted to hear a little bit about why he thought the genre had declined. He said that, quote, "There was a good period there where half a decade of clones came out. There were some gems, but for people entering into the genre, the first experience might have been something not great." He was a designer at Relic Entertainment from 1998 all the way to 2010, and he was still with Relic after that. He just got promoted. So he certainly knows what he's talking about. Unfortunately, a flood of software is often bad news for everyone involved in the market, and that certainly bore out. Development of new RTS games really started to slow down from 2005 on as publishers became tired of throwing money into an overcrowded market. By 2010, the flood of new RTS games had slowed to a trickle, and that's really remained the case ever since.
Sword Art tried to engage there, but the dredge line only.
Of course, fans of the genre did not just disappear from the face of the earth as the genre's popularity began to fall off. Instead, they kind of went to some spin-off genres, most notably tower defense and multiplayer online battle arenas, better known today, of course, as MOBAs.
This is something for the Zoomers that they need to be reminded about this. All the MOBAs were actually in RTS games. It's crazy now because MOBAs are so big, right? And RTS games many times are treated like a thing of the past. But like, yeah, they were actually like if had Blizzard played their hand correctly, they would have just hired the Dota guy and this blown Dota up, and Riot Games wouldn't even exist, nor would Dota 2 exist. That does really kind of highlight a failure of Blizzard's lack of attention in their own genre that they mastered making.
Now, tower defense games, they experienced their own cycle of popularity and eventual demise, but for a while they were very hot. The most popular example on the PC and on consoles was probably Defense Grid The Awakening, which was a really big indie hit back in 2009, but let's be honest, a lot of the action in this genre was happening on mobile and in the casual gaming space. Games like Plants vs. Zombies, Gemcraft, Kingdom Rush, and Bloons Tower Defense. These were the titles that were really hot in the genre, and for a time they were dominating charts on the App Store and on the Google Play.
Yeah, this was a funny time because we didn't really know where cell phone games and iPad games were going to end up. Because when Plants vs. Zombies came out, I mean, that was right. Do you remember, like, everybody, like, people made fun of the iPad and how dumb it looked, and then all of a sudden it was like everybody had one, and then like all these game companies started to make games, like, you know, the smartphone was getting better, and all these companies were beginning to move over to that, and then there was, I mean, we all know where it ended up, right? I mean, console games are still big, PC games are still big, but it was like, are all these game companies going to switch over and just do games on iPad? Is that the future now? Is it just going to be games on your phone? But Plants vs. Zombies, by the way, this game specifically was a masterpiece. I used to love, you know, when I would have these international tournaments I'd go to, sitting next to Artosis on an airplane, watching him intensely play Plants vs. Zombies, and I'm just making fun of him the whole time. But yeah, I mean, honestly, this game is so good. I don't know what happened with Plants vs. Zombies. It definitely seems like iPad games have taken a back seat. I guess peak iPad gaming was maybe Hearthstone. That was a lot of fun. Obviously, you can play Hearthstone on your normal desktop too. But yeah, a lot of these ideas were already happening inside RTS. I used to play tower defense games in StarCraft 1. And then when I saw these other companies just make their own game independently and monetize it and make millions, I thought, oh my God. You know, it's kind of one of those moments where you're like, why didn't I think of that?
Store. These tower defense games really took up all the casual interest that remained in the real-time strategy genre.
And that's a really good point. Like Plants vs. Zombies, you know, that's a really fun game, and it's a different type of setting, right? It's not the intense hardcore 1v1. It's not your long RTS campaign setting, but yeah, if now with Plants vs. Zombies, why would you need to go back into an RTS and play that? And one thing that I'm hoping for here with Stormgate, Zero Space, all these games that are coming out, is that they make space for these types of experiences inside their own game. Again, the big failure from Blizzard in my mind is that they really didn't know what was going on inside their own game. They didn't know what was happening in StarCraft. They didn't know what was happening inside Warcraft 3. And all these other people just saw it and took the idea and moved on with it.
Play, easy to get into, and easy to put down. On the opposite end of the spectrum, you have the MOBAs. The genre got its start back in StarCraft with custom maps and then really evolved in Warcraft 3 with Defense of the Ancients. 2009 was a big year because that's when League of Legends came out, and then in 2013, well, Dota 2 came out on Steam. There were a few other contemporary efforts that most people don't remember today. Demigod was one of those, along with Avalon Heroes. And even Warhammer Online apparently tried to spin itself off as a MOBA, although I didn't play that one, I gotta be honest. Of course, in any case, MOBAs ended up proving really great for esports because they're extremely focused on micromanagement and player skills. So they siphoned off all the serious players. Now, this isn't to say
I don't know if that's a fair argument that it's siphoned off the serious players. I think what happened with MOBAs is they had an easy team game, and it's much easier to get people in competitive online stuff in team settings. Maybe you're like me watching this. I'm one of the weird ones. I'm completely fine laddering all day by myself. I don't need a teammate to blame or to carry me or for me to carry them. But that's unusual. And that's also the same for fighting games. Fighting game, you get the same kind of person. They want to grind. They want to figure it out on their own. I think with MOBAs, it allowed a lot of people who maybe could have been a little bit intimidated to get access to come in. And the other thing, too, is that, like, yeah, you can have games, team games in StarCraft, but it's like super... It's still hardcore, right? You still really have to know what you're doing. Although I think StarCraft 2 did a decent job of improving that.
Space for traditional real-time strategy games, as the success of the Age of Empires remasters and of Age of Empires 4 have proven. Still, I think it's pretty clear the genre has evolved into a variety of offshoots that differ quite a bit from the original concept. And from that perspective, I think it's worth questioning whether the rather tight definition of a real-time strategy game had doomed the genre from the start. Comparing StarCraft 2 to games like Sins of a Solar Empire or Factorio will get some real-time strategy game fans pretty annoyed pretty quickly. And even games like Dawn of War 2 are sometimes excluded from real-time strategy canon. I think this lack of flexibility may have accidentally painted the genre into a corner.
The novelty wore out. Season 3.
Acknowledge.
I find myself thinking a lot about why some games succeed and others fail. It is, after all, a very interesting part of video game history. One theory is that breakout hits tend to happen at the intersection between a novel new technology and innovative gameplay. And the real-time strategy genre was certainly one such intersection. Okay, so what was the novel new technology that drove real-time strategy to popularity? Well, it was something you use every day: the mouse. Now, the mouse was invented all the way back in 1964, but it didn't really start to catch on until the Mac, Amiga, and Atari ST made it more popular through the 1980s. By the late 1980s, it was a pretty common peripheral on computers, although not always mandatory. Early PC games were often severely limited by the need to interact with them through a keyboard or sometimes maybe a joystick. This made fine-grained input very difficult, but with the mouse, it was finally possible to interact directly with a game's graphical user interface.
I think it's important to point out here, like, he's correct on that too. Like, there was nothing quite as intense. You were playing with a mouse and a keyboard at the same time. There were shooting games, but whenever you see anybody even play a shooting game back then or now, it's the mouse. But your hand is stationary. With StarCraft and these other RTS games, your hand's going all over the keyboard. Also, a lot of people played like shooting games back then with just the keyboard. People would move around with the arrow keys. It was like later on, I think, when people started to figure out this concept of like, oh, you can like just have the mouse hooked in where the controls are and you can shoot anywhere. You can shoot the head, stuff like that. And again, some of you guys might be a lot younger than me, but I remember as a kid playing Doom with just the keyboard. And then the real novelty of actually playing an RTS game with the mouse and finding the hotkeys to hit all the, to macro out the units quickly was quite an experience.
Resulted in hit games like 1987's Maniac Mansion, 1990's God game Populous, and Westwood's 1991 role-playing game hit Eye of the Beholder. If you look at these games today, they can seem kind of strange. They'll oftentimes have big buttons and bulky interfaces that are surrounding a main gameplay window. It seems very inefficient. But at the time, it made a lot of sense because the mouse was new and players were just starting to learn how to interact with games by clicking on things. At the time, this was a big
That's a really good
innovation.
point.
It was just more intuitive to click on buttons than to learn keyboard commands from a manual. It was Brett Sperry, a co-founder of Westwood Studios and director of development on Eye of the Beholder, who found a novel way to apply this to strategy games with Dune 2. The game used the mouse to let players quickly and directly interact with units in real time. It was a concept that relied entirely on the speed and the precision of mouse input. Real-time strategy games were actually very hard to pull off on earlier machines, as the earliest efforts in the genre show. That's a topic I've covered in a previous video, so I will throw up a link to it right now. Of course, new technology is always just around the corner, and designers are always coming up with new ideas. And at the same time, ideas that had once seemed novel begin to go stale and they no longer grab the attention that they once did. I think the leaders in the genre like Blizzard and Westwood managed to hold on to popularity longer than they otherwise would have by embracing new innovations. It turned out that real-time strategy games were great for competitive multiplayer.
That is true. I mean, think of Warcraft 3, and I know Warcraft 3 can be, especially if, I know a lot of my viewers are StarCraft people. It's kind of a hot topic, like heroes and creeps. But you know, that was a pretty novel idea. In fact, it was a crazy novel idea to have like heroes in an RTS. It's cool to see those innovations.
And as 3D graphics became more popular, they were a pretty good showcase for early 3D hardware. But after about a decade of popularity, the genre did grow cold. And I think that does have to do with other new innovations that distracted PC gamers. Examples would be things like open world games, massively multiplayer RPGs, and competitive shooters. Compared to these titles, real-time strategy games just started to feel a bit old-fashioned. So those are my 3 reasons why the real-time strategy genre died. Now, of course, if you liked this video, feel free to give it a like and subscribe.
Guys, check out this guy's page. It's Computer Gaming Yesterday. He made a great video. This is a year old, so keep in mind that, like, you know, a lot of the Stormgate news, the world we're in right now, if you're wondering why that wasn't brought up here, that's because it's old. Anyways, you know, I'm optimistic about RTS games. I've been having fun with Stormgate. I had a lot of fun with Zero Space. Yeah, and who knows what else is out there. So it's going to be fun to see if we can see a big resurgence here with RTS again. If you like me reacting to this kind of content, by the way, please like and subscribe. Have a good one, and I hope to see you again in a future video. Bye-bye.